On November the 21st, 1914, 3 aircraft of the Royal Naval Air Service took off from an airfield in France on the first long-range bombing raid ever undertaken. The aircraft, an 80-horsepower Avro 504, was the world's first bomber. It was the first flying machine to be fitted with a mechanical bomb release and was carrying the largest bomb load ever known at that time, 4 20-pound bombs. 11 bombs were dropped, destroying 2 Zeppelins and disrupting German plans for raids on London. It was no easy job, flying over enemy territory all the way. The Avro 504 established a tradition that was maintained in the Second World War by another great Avro aircraft, the immortal Lancaster. The part the Lancaster played in bringing victory is best summed up by the wartime head of Bomber Command, Marshal of the Royal Air Force, Sir Arthur Harris.
In these happier days, it is perhaps as well to recall the part played by Bomber, the largest forces raised by the Commonwealth during the war. And when it was at its greatest, it was composed mainly of the Avro Lancaster, which to my mind was the most important single factor in the winning of the war.
Avro Company, as the parent design firm, had to ensure that the maximum number of Lancasters were built in the least possible time. In all, no fewer than 7,366 Lancasters were built by the Lancaster Group. Lancasters dropped 608,000 tons of bombs on the enemy, more than all other Royal Air Force aircraft put together. The shattering effect of this onslaught upon German industry and morale is now history. When the bombing ended in Europe, events moved speedily in the Far Eastern theater. The face and the future of the world were changed with the atom bomb. And later, the hydrogen bomb. The strategy of air power moved into a new era. There followed the uneasy peace of the late 40s and the Cold War of the 50s. An iron curtain cast its shadow across the world. The democracies faced new dangers in Europe and Asia, and tension continued to mount, though statesmen struggled to preserve the peace.
Rise to the occasion, in the years that are to come, it may be found that we once again hold the key to opening a safe...
But in recent years, we had seen evidence that others had not been idle in building up powerful forces of destruction. Thanks to the vision of the air staff, Britain had not been left behind. They saw the need for aircraft able to carry even deadlier bomb loads, higher, faster, and further than ever before. It was in January of 1947 that the specifications for such a bomber and order to tender was received by A.V. Rowe & Company Limited. Sir Roy Dobson, managing director of Avro, immediately called his design and technical team together.
Avro's designers had already examined the problems of creating an aircraft with the very ambitious performance demanded by the ministry, but now it had become a firm requirement. Roy Ewens, chief designer, explains the problems involved. A very big conventional aircraft with swept wings seemed the obvious solution.
But it just would not do. The wings were too large and too heavy. An alternative concept we explored was the tailless aircraft. But here again we were beaten by weight. The specification demands a very high cruising speed, close to that of sound, and this means that the wings must have a low thickness chord ratio, a low wing loading, high sweep back, and low aspect ratio. Our project studies led us eventually to the triangular or delta planform, which gave the best combination of these features. The Delta has other important advantages. The low wing loading gives reasonable takeoff and landing speeds and distances without using flaps or other complicated high-lift devices. The low aspect ratio gives excellent flying qualities in spite of the high sweep back. The wing structure is inherently stiff and strong, and there's ample space within it for housing the power plants, the fuel tanks, and the undercarriage without prejudicing the clean aerodynamic contour. The weight and complication of a tailplane are avoided, longitudinal control is provided by elevators at the trailing edge of the wing. The more we studied the Air Ministry specification, the more the delta seemed to be the best answer. Finally, a decision was taken. AVRO would build a delta.
In the company's wind tunnel at Woodford, the aerodynamic characteristics of the new planform were thoroughly investigated. So little was known of the practical behavior of the delta wing that an unusual decision was made. Experimental aircraft, exact third-scale replicas of the new bomber, were built for research into the handling characteristics of aircraft of this shape. It was at this stage, early in 1950, that Mr. Rowley Falk joined the company. Mr. Falk probably knows more about delta wing aircraft than any other pilot. He began development flights at a crucial stage.
2 third-scale research aircraft were built to try out the flying characteristics for the projected bomber. The 707A was made for high-speed flying, and the 707B for low-speed handling. The 707B was built first. As soon as we were thoroughly satisfied with the low-speed handling of the deltas, I started on testing the high-speed aircraft, the 707A.
It was the first time any delta wing aircraft had flown in Britain, and it aroused great curiosity, which wasn't entirely confined to the aeronautical profession.
They were busy and exciting days back in 1950. For the small Avro Delta team, life seemed to revolve around a little hut on the Ministry of Supply's research airfield at Boscombe Down. During all the Delta test flights, automatic cameras recorded readings on the dials of the 24 instruments. The film was removed for immediate development after each flight, so that the readings of every instrument at known intervals of time could be examined. A later technique is now in use, in which instruments make their own records automatically.
While all this research was going on, a full-scale mock-up of the Vulcan was built. In addition, the company installed several new test rigs. In this rig, the power-operated flying control system has been laid out exactly as planned for the aircraft. Typical movements applied to the stick by the pilot could be reproduced, and the responses of the controls analyzed. A feel box enables the pilot to retain the same feel of the aircraft as if he were using manual controls. On the same rig, large lead discs represent the mass of the ailerons, elevators, and rudder. Hundreds of hours flying could thus be condensed into a short space of time. On the hydraulics test rig, the undercarriage was tested under loads representing conditions of actual flight. Another test rig was built to examine engine bay installations and to check pressures and temperatures. Wool tufts attached to the intake ducts were used to study the airflow. It was found that the Vulcan's long intake tunnels smoothed out irregularities in the airflow so that each paired engine received an identical supply of air. Because of the extreme altitude at which the Vulcan was to fly, some special research was also needed on the pressure cabin. This was completely immersed in a water tank and water pressure applied to the inside. These tests are a guarantee of the crew's safety. Special research was also conducted on the window glass, which was tested to destruction. Glass panels were mounted on a frame representing the windscreen and the assembly bolted to the steel cover of a pressure vessel. A preloaded dial gauge was connected to the surface of the glass by a fine wire. As the pressure in the vessel rises, the glass panel deflects and the distortion is shown on the dial. As the breaking point is approached, the fluid can be seen escaping from the plastic interlayer between the glass laminations. A complete aircraft was also built for structural tests and has successfully withstood loads exceeding the design requirements. Saturday, the 30th of August, 1952. The first Vulcan prototype was ready to fly. 4.5 years of intensive work had gone into the making of this aircraft. Unlike the launching of a ship, the first flight of an aircraft is not a ceremonial event. The only people present were a few of the firm's staff, to whom this day meant so much. It was a huge aeroplane, and quite unlike anything of its size that had flown before. But its test pilot, because of his experience of the 707s, was full of confidence. He'd already flown Deltas for dozens of hours.
Woodford Tower 698. You read?
698, Woodford Tower, reading you loud and clear.
698, taxi clearance.
Clear to taxi, runway 26.
Takeoff.
698, Woodford Tower, cleared for takeoff.
Only 3 days after its first flight, the prototype made a dramatic appearance at the SBAC display at Farnborough. Falk flew it alone. This 50-ton aeroplane could be flown single-handed. It's one thing to build a prototype, but quite another to put the aircraft into production.
Yes, production is the key word now, and I don't think that should bother us too much. We have a staff here of about 9,000 people at the moment. We did have about 40,000 during the war, and we have, of course, a very efficient and able production and pre-production administration.
The production of the Vulcan had been planned from the time when the aircraft was just a pencil outline. 50,000 special tools had to be made to put the first squadron of Vulcans into the air. Each aircraft is built up from over 100,000 separate parts. Shown here is a universal rib assembly jig. Each rib, exactly made, has its place in the wing assembly jig. All Avro's press capacity was used to hasten production. In this 5,000-ton rubber press, large parts can be produced in one operation, thereby lowering costs. A special procedure was adopted for making a curved spar, one of the few unusual parts in the structure. This machine was designed and made by Avro to roll the spar to contour. But these are all existing techniques, and to remain in the forefront, new ideas must be developed to improve continuously the performance of aircraft. At Avro, much time and effort have been spent on evolving lighter and stiffer structures. This honeycomb sandwich, which has these qualities, is now in production for the Vulcan. Here you see the manufacture of a typical honeycomb sandwich panel. The assembly is clamped together and placed inside a bag from which the air is evacuated. The adhesive, previously applied to the inner surfaces of the sheets, is now cured in an oven. So this undercarriage fairing panel, for instance, is much lighter and much stiffer than one made by conventional methods. And so the Vulcan goes into production with special virtues as a bomber. Ingenuity with excellence of aircraft design have combined to produce a bomber of immense striking power. But the ability to design and build a beautiful-looking aircraft, which meets its original specification, isn't enough in itself. Peter Sutcliffe, the company's chief aerodynamicist, will explain how new operational requirements are met by the Vulcan without major redesign.
Flow separation is one of the most difficult problems of transonic flight, and solutions can only be obtained by close attention to the shape of the wing, both in plan form and section, especially in the region near the tips. The basic wing of the Vulcan has been modified by increasing the chord by about 20% in this region and extending the chord forwards and downwards towards the local incident flow. This simple modification allows the air to flow smoothly over the upper surface of the wing at incidences far greater than is possible on the basic Vulcan. All production Vulcans are fitted with this modified leading edge and are capable of using to full advantage those engines now being developed up to and including 13,000 pounds sea level static thrust. If we are now to consider the benefits in terms of increased altitude that are available from engines of even greater thrust, then we must consider more far-reaching modifications. This diagram shows the extent of such modifications, but even here it will be seen that a very considerable part of the major structure is left completely unchanged. The only portion of the wing affected by the modifications is that outboard of the elevators. It is the comparative ease with which modifications of this kind can be introduced that gives the tailless delta layout its great development potential, and once again demonstrates the basic suitability of the Vulcan for the high-flying, fast bomber.
In order to equip our engineers with the tools for fundamental research into the problems which face us, the company has invested large sums of money in capital equipment. A thorough and painstaking study of the effects of temperature are needed. This high-altitude pressure chamber has been installed to reproduce the extreme conditions of pressure and temperature in which not only the Vulcan, but other aircraft of the future will fly. The operation of aircraft mechanisms can be studied in this chamber at a temperature of -70 degrees centigrade and at pressures equivalent to an altitude of 75,000 feet. The Avro flutter and response simulators can tell aircraft designers precisely how their project will react to control movements or disturbances in the air when it flies. Here, the simulated disturbance to an aircraft damps out quickly. At a different configuration, the same disturbance leads to a nosedive. Added to these aids is the very latest digital computer, popularly known as the electronic brain. The problems translated into perforations on a roll are fed into the computer. Calculations which would have taken a month can now be condensed into a matter of minutes. Even the models used in supersonic wind tunnel research are now built in steel and finished by hand. In this tunnel, speeds up to Mach 1.6 can be reached, and Avros are now building a third wind tunnel for research into Mach numbers as high as 3.5. The Schlieren apparatus is moved into position. Observers wait for the shock wave to appear on the Schlieren screen.
And so, the Vulcan joins the Royal Air Force. What began as a penciled outline in the design office of A.V. Rowe becomes a formidable weapon in the hands of specially picked crews of Bomber Command. The Under-Secretary of State for Air has said that the Vulcan is equal to, if not better than, any other bomber in the world. These aircraft will be followed by a later version, the Mark II Vulcan. This will have increased all-round performance in range, speed, altitude, and carrying capacity. Vulcan's striking power will be increased by the Avro standoff bomb, perhaps the most important factor in the vital role that this aircraft is destined to play. This guided weapon, designed and built by Avro, will give enormous tactical advantages. The Vulcan indeed becomes a fully controllable missile launching platform. The Vulcan holds a key position in Britain's frontline defense. Here is an aircraft with a great tradition behind it and a great future before it.